Carlo Gambino died on October 15, 1976, at his Long Island home. He had ruled the Gambino family for nearly 2 decades, and by the time his life ended, his organization stood at the top of New York's underworld. The family had money in gambling, loan sharking, hijacking, labor unions, trucking, construction, the garment industry, airport rackets, and business fronts that looked clean enough to survive casual inspection. Carlo's greatest skill was not noise, it was control. He understood men, money, patience, and risk. His last major decision was the succession, and that decision shaped everything that followed. The obvious man to many soldiers was Aniello Neil Delacroce. Neil was the underboss. He had street authority, fear around his name, loyalty from old-line soldiers, and deep influence over the traditional side of the family. He was the kind of man crews understood immediately. He knew the social clubs, the bookmakers, the collectors, the hijackers, the loan sharks, and the men who moved through New York's older rackets. He did not need to explain his power. His presence already did that. Carlo chose Paul Castellano. That choice shocked many men inside and around the family. Castellano was Carlo's cousin and brother-in-law, but family blood alone does not explain the move. Castellano represented a different future for the Gambino family. He was business-minded, patient, and comfortable in the worlds of construction, trucking, meat distribution, wholesale supply, union influence, and corporate-looking rackets. He did not carry Neil's street following, but he carried the kind of money Carlo valued at the end of his reign. The succession was not only a question of affection, it was a question of what Carlo thought the family needed next. The Gambinos had already become more than a street organization. They were a criminal business empire with labor power, industry pressure, and money moving through companies, contracts, and unions. Carlo had built the family into something larger than neighborhood enforcement. Castellano looked like the man who could protect that wider empire. Neil looked like the man who could command the soldiers. That difference sits at the center of the entire story. Castellano was not stronger than Neil on the street. Neil was not weaker than Castellano in reputation. They were different kinds of power. Castellano's power came from earning systems, family ties, business fronts, and Carlo's trust. Neil's power came from rank, old respect, direct command, and the loyalty of men who believed the underboss had earned the throne. Carlo's decision placed business succession above street expectation. Carlo had reasons to think that way. He had always watched law enforcement, prison time, and informants carefully. He discouraged narcotics trafficking among his people, tied to the belief that long drug sentences could push men into cooperation. He preferred rackets with steady money and lower exposure, gambling, loans, extortion, unions, trucking, construction, and commercial influence. Castellano fit that model better than Neil. He looked like a boss who could keep the family rich without turning every dispute into open violence. Castellano's business world was not clean. It only looked cleaner from the outside. Meat distribution, poultry, construction, trucking, unions, and supply networks could all be used for pressure, kickbacks, rigged access, and hidden profit. Castellano understood those lanes. He saw value in controlling pieces of legitimate industry without standing directly in front of every crime. Carlo likely saw that skill as protection. The more the family looked like business, the harder it could be to strike from the outside. Neil's world was more traditional. He was respected in Manhattan and among crews that valued old rules, personal loyalty, toughness, and direct enforcement. Men such as John Gotti were emotionally tied to Neil's side of the family. That loyalty would become one of the most important facts in Gambino history. While Neil lived, he could restrain angry men. While Neil lived, Castellano's authority had a buffer. Carlo's arrangement depended on that balance. The settlement after Carlo's death showed the design. Castellano became boss, Neil remained underboss. The traditional rackets stayed close to Neil's influence, while Castellano controlled the top seat and the wider business direction. On paper, That was a compromise. In practice, it split the family into two major currents: Castellano's Brooklyn and Staten Island business wing, and Neil's Manhattan Street wing. The family stayed together, but the seam was visible from the beginning. Carlo may have believed Neil would accept the arrangement out of discipline. He was right. Neil did not launch a war over the succession. He did not split the family. He did not turn his soldiers against Castellano in 1976. That restraint preserved Carlo's design. It also shows Neil's importance. A weaker underboss might have rebelled and destroyed the family from within. Neil accepted the insult, held his men in line, and kept the organization from breaking open. That acceptance did not erase the resentment. Many soldiers saw Castellano as distant from the life they lived. He had money and rank, but he did not have Neil's street gravity. Castellano's Staten Island mansion became a symbol of separation. To the crews, it could look like the boss had moved away from them in every sense, geographically, socially, and emotionally. The family's money still moved upward, but respect did not travel as easily as cash. Castellano's leadership also carried a dangerous contradiction. He wanted the profit of the street without the street's culture controlling him. He wanted tribute from crews involved in gambling, hijacking, loans, and other traditional rackets, while also pushing the family toward a more corporate style of power. Men who risked arrest and violence below him could see that as arrogance. The money from the street was welcome. The men from the street were often treated as a problem. Neil remained the living bridge. Gotti and others who disliked Castellano still respected Neil. That respect held back open rebellion. Gotti could complain, but Neil's authority carried real weight. The family had two centers of loyalty, but only one man could keep the street side from moving too fast. That man was Neil. Carlo's succession plan had worked only while Neil was alive enough, respected enough, and willing enough to hold the line. The drug issue widened the divide in the early 1980s. Castellano opposed narcotics trafficking, partly due to the long prison sentences attached to drug cases and the danger of cooperation. Gotti's circle, especially around Angelo Ruggiero and Gene Gotti, came under federal narcotics pressure. The Quack Quack tapes became a threat inside the family. Castellano wanted the transcripts. Gotti's side resisted. Neil tried to protect his people while preventing a direct break with the boss. That conflict exposed the weakness in Carlo's arrangement. Castellano had the title. Neil had the trust of the angry street wing. When those two forms of power worked together, the family stayed intact. When they pulled apart, the boss needed the underboss more than he wanted to admit. Castellano could command, but Neil could calm. Castellano could demand obedience, but Neil could make obedience possible. Then Neil died on December 2nd, 1985. The buffer disappeared. Within days, Castellano moved toward Thomas Bellotti as underboss and appeared ready to weaken or break up Gotti's crew. Castellano also failed to attend Neil's wake, a decision many men around Gotti read as disrespect. In that atmosphere, the resentment from 1976 returned with force. On December 16, 1985, Castellano and Bellotti were shot dead outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. John Gotti's rise began with that murder. The assassination was not only a power grab by one ambitious captain, it was the final collapse of Carlo Gambino's last political design. Carlo had tried to join Castellano's business future to Neil's street authority. Once Neil was gone, the two halves no longer held together. The question of why Carlo chose Castellano over Neil has no single clean answer. Family ties helped Castellano. Earning power helped him more. His business style matched Carlo's long-term view of the family. His approach to construction, trucking, unions, meat distribution, and legitimate-looking influence fit the direction Carlo had already taken. Carlo likely wanted the family to keep moving away from reckless street exposure and toward quieter, higher-value rackets. Castellano looked like the safest heir for that strategy. Neil's disadvantage was not weakness. His disadvantage was what he represented. He represented the men most likely to bring heat, force disputes, and live inside the traditional rackets that Carlo understood but did not want dominating the family's future. Neil had respect, he had fear, he had loyalty, he had the soldiers. But Carlo may have seen those strengths as dangerous if placed at the very top. A boss with Neil's street following could unite the crews, but he could also keep the family tied to the older style Carlo was trying to move beyond. Castellano's weakness was the opposite. He had the business brain, but he never fully won the street heart of the family. Carlo could place him on the throne, but he could not make every soldier feel that Castellano had earned it in the way Neil had. That missing respect became a long-term debt. It did not come due in 1976. It came due in 1985. The succession therefore becomes one of the most important decisions in Gambino history. Carlo chose money over popularity. He chose business structure over street emotion. He chose a relative and high earner over an underboss beloved by many soldiers. For almost 9 years, the arrangement survived through Neil's discipline. Once Neil died, the compromise died with him. The final lesson is not that Carlo made a simple mistake. The truth is sharper than that. Carlo's choice made sense inside his own worldview. He wanted a family that could earn quietly, avoid unnecessary heat, and preserve control through business power. Castellano fit that design. Neil fit the men. Carlo solved the succession on paper, but left a human problem underneath it. The boss he chose needed the underboss he passed over. That is the tragedy of the Gambino succession. Castellano inherited the throne. Neil kept the peace. Gotti inherited the anger. Carlo's final move preserved the family for a time, then left behind the exact fracture that made the Spark Steakhouse assassination possible. The Gambino family did not split the day Carlo died. It split slowly, along the line between Castellano's money and Neil's loyalty, until the man holding that line was gone.